And so you had 3 robots.
Yeah, there they are.
Yep. And I love it as a card game. And they are all different sizes because you had different people.
We had different people with different disabilities or abnormalities.
Yep.
Or had been in various tragic accidents, or Vietnam veterans who had their legs blown off by landmines. We had a whole mix of people, and some of the people that couldn't perform just because of some issue, we hired them on our crew to help build the miniatures and be part of the movie anyway, even if they weren't on camera.
And then what you did there had an impact on George Lucas later on in Star Wars, and Steven Spielberg with E.T. as well.
Yeah.
What about working with Bruce Stern? I know
Fantastic.
Because here you had primarily one actor for the whole movie.
Well,
right?
I was scared. I'm making my first movie, I'm directing my first actor, and I said, well, I don't want a whole bunch of actors, I just want one. and Mike Ruskoff and I, we looked at a lot of different actors and interviewed actors, and I really liked Bruce Stern. And Bruce Stern was a pathological killer in all of his roles. He was just like, because of his nature and his look and his body language and everything, everybody thought he was just a baby killer.
He killed John Wayne.
Yeah, he killed John. Well, that was later.
The Cowboys, right.
Yeah. But anyway, I really liked him. He was a really sweet man, very, very charming, and very communicative with me as a young director. And he would say, listen, we're going to do this together. And I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'll tell you why I'm behaving the way I am. I'm a method actor. I use these techniques to get in a certain mood or a certain look or to cry on cue or whatever you want. We'll work it out together. And he helped me learn how to direct actors and how to become fearless about actors. And I think that's probably one of the biggest roadblocks to any young filmmaker is the fear of actors.
Can you talk about that a little bit, like to share some of that knowledge?
Well, I think that when you're working with anybody, and then you up the ante. You're not just working with them to lay bricks or something. You're saying, I want you to be in a certain emotional state, or I want you to cry, or I want you to tell them, I want you to break my heart on camera, looking that way, please. And that requires a kind of fearlessness that I started learning in other personal activities like group therapy, just learning not to be afraid of other men or other women, how to talk frankly with someone, how to reveal yourself without feeling like you're going to lose yourself or lose your ego or be humiliated or something. You have to achieve a kind of fearlessness. I worked at the Actors Studio for a while, just watching actors work out. I had to learn what actors have to go through to learn their craft. And then I was lucky to work with Bruce and the other cast members, and then said, oh, yeah, this is okay. Let's move on.
Did you rehearse much, or was it the fact that you were doing a low budget film? You had to get
almost no rehearsals.
Everything was fast.
Everything was fast. Everything was take 2, maybe take 3 max, and we had to just keep shooting.
You were using film, so
we were shooting with film in real locations. I mean, it was inside the space freighter, and the cinematographer. Charles Wheeler, he said, this is supposed to be a space movie, but it's actually a lack of space movie. Because in a movie set, everything is fake. If the camera is going to be here, you just fly out the wall. You just remove the wall of the set. So everybody has room for the microphone boom and the grips and gaffers to work. Well, in a steel aircraft carrier, you can't move anything. You're stuck, so your head's up against the wall, and you're trying to get in the viewfinder, and there's only so much distance from the lens to the actor to the wall. So it was like shooting a movie in a closet, really.
Yep.
And but that turned out to be fun. It gave the movie a look.
And that movie, can you talk about the theme of that movie, Silent Running?
Well, it developed over time. The original story was an alien contact story.
Okay.
That never really got fully developed. It just didn't seem to be going anywhere with the studio. And then the whole idea, well, it's a space freighter, what has it got on board? Why are they there? What are they doing? And then the whole ecological thing came up. So that developed over 3 different writers. Steve Bochco, who became very famous.
L.A. Law and
all these television series, a really terrific writer. And he was the son-in-law of Lou Wasserman, who ran the studio.
Yep,
So
Universal.
He had a sweetheart deal.
Yep.
And then Derek Washburn, who lived in the Berkshires.
Okay.
That's how one of those ships got called Berkshire.
Oh, gotcha.
I didn't know from Berkshires. I'd never been to the Berkshires, but he stuck it in the movie. I said, well, whatever. And it turned out to be meaningful 50 years later. And then Mike Cimino,
Who did
another famous guy. And so they all
Deer
kinda,
Hunter.
they all kind of took their passes at the script. And I felt like, well, I'm in charge of this movie. I thought up this movie. I'm responsible for this movie. And I like bits and pieces of each of their screenplays. And I'm going to rewrite the whole thing myself. And this was before the age of word processing or final draft. And it was typed on a typewriter. And I actually cut up lines of dialogue and scenes and pasted them together with scotch tape, and reorganized the entire script, and then wrote my own linking material until I had a draft that I liked. That's what we shot.
Wow. And then you had a little bit of music. You had to think musically, and maybe you want to talk about how the Joan Baez and how that came about. Well,
this was in the early 70s, and this was the age of drugs and flower children, and Joan Baez and Joan, there's a lot of great singers we were just talking about the other night. But I really liked Joan Baez's music. It had a kind of homey heartfulness to it. And one of the things I was trying to do with Silent Running was to do just the opposite of 2001. I wanted to do the opposite of a clinically cold scientific sci-fi movie. I wanted to make a movie with heart, about feelings and some emotional layers to it. And I really didn't gravitate initially to Joan herself. I gravitated to the orchestrations by Peter Schickele.
Right.
I was listening to the music. I really liked the structure of the music, and I didn't think about her as a voice. And I tracked him down and asked. He'd never done a movie score before, and I asked him if he would do it. And that was when I found that he had another life, which was P.D.Q. Bach.
Right.
And if you know anything about that, this guy's an extremely astute musicologist, professor, and music historian, and had this whole other life called P.D.Q. Bach, where he would get a whole orchestra together and then make fun of Strauss waltzes,
right,
or make fun of anybody who had ever done classical music, because he was a brilliant thing, and so you'd have like a music lesson and have a lot of fun and laughs at the same time. But he did this score, which he wrote, and we recorded, and then I asked him, I said, maybe it'd be cool to have a song in this movie.
And that was something that was happening too. They were starting studios, etc., were putting songs in as a way to even monetize.
Yeah, that was a business thing.
Yep.
It was a smart thing to do. If you could get a hit single out of a movie, mazel tov, that sounds great. So I asked Peter if he could get a hold of her, and he said he would, and he tried, and he couldn't reach her. She just wouldn't return his phone calls for some reason. She was very busy. She was on tour or whatever. And this was going on for weeks, and we couldn't get a hold of her. We were just about to give up. And just by some complete quirk, I was in the Chicago airport changing planes, sitting in the waiting room, and I saw Joan Baez walk by about as far away as that back door, getting off another plane. I said, whoa, there she is. And I just bolted over there, and I said, I'm Doug Trumbull. We've been trying to reach you for weeks. She said, oh, really? She thought I was stalking her. So I said, no, I'm not stalking you. This is completely by accident, but please just call Peter, and he'll tell you what it's all about. And so he did, and she showed up and did the songs, and it was very sweet. It was a really nice experience for me. That was a completely new thing to go into the world of music, but she was completely exhausted. She was on tour.
Yeah.
She would do a take of the song and then virtually collapse like on the rug right there. Wow. She would just like lie down and take a nap with her jacket as a pillow and sleep until the take two. And then she'd get back up and do the song again. And I didn't know anything about the music business or how exhausted she might be. And if I had known more than I knew then, I would have had her soften the song a little bit. I thought she was a little strident because she was a little intense at the time. But it was a great experience. I'm not complaining about it all. I'm just saying you learn stuff every time around. You know?
And you also took an opportunity. I was having this conversation yesterday with Karen about opportunities that come by, and then you seize the moment. Like you saw it was her, you ran after her, and you made it happen, and you created luck. It was meant to be.
You do. You have to create your own luck. You
Right.
do. That's why I said persistence and perseverance is actually more valuable than talent.
Absolutely, I believe that. What about
Got to have both, but
right?
yeah.
Right. You have to be able to deliver when the opportunity opens up. What about? Do you ever look at like what would you do differently with silent running if you had the opportunity? Like if
well, a couple of things. I made a big mistake one day. I was becoming really infatuated with the relationships between the drones. That this guy was surrounded by these creatures that actually had a life and communicate. I had one little shot where they're kind of talking to each other up on the outside the thing, and they're saying, you can imagine they're saying, this guy's out of his mind. He's going psychotic on us. What are we going to do? That's kind of what you want to do. And the underlying relationships I was trying to build was similar in my mind. Objectively, was this is like a musher on a sled in the Antarctic with 3 dogs.
Right.
That's the relationship. Is that a man that's going to start anthropomorphizing things around him to keep himself from going mad?
Right.
Which is kind of like Wilson in
the
Tom
Castaway
Hanks movie.
Castaway.
Yeah, Castaway. So, which came much later, but that was the idea. So I had designed this scene, and you might remember the pool table that's in the recreation room, and the pool table had this kind of weird edge on it that was about 1 foot wide, and a circular pool table that was run by a robot, and the robot would play against the crew members. And this robot was kind of unreliable, didn't work all the time, and it would miss shots and do stuff no matter how hard we planned. But the idea I had planned, a big scene I had, was that somehow the robots get up on the edge of the pool table and play against the machine. It was a really funny scene. It was robots against robots.
That's great.
And because I was a young filmmaker and I didn't really know how to choose one thing over another, I omitted that scene in favor of just a couple of scenes of Bruce walking around the corridor being bored and psychotic, which was a huge mistake.
Yeah, okay.
I should have dumped that and gone with the robots.
Right.
But that's the kind of thing that happens in the making of a movie. You got to make choices. You've only got 32 days and you're done. And you got to do the best with every day and every hour and every minute that you have at your disposal and try to do it. And so that was one of my regrets about that movie. And I'm developing another movie now that's similar in some ways.
Cool.
It's got a whole bunch of robots in it.
Cool.
There's going to be a whole robot life going on. And I want to give them screen time.
Good.
And I want to make them characters. And I just saw a wonderful show at Mass Mocha yesterday. And there's a wonderful artist. What's the name of the artist, Greg? Yeah, her name is King. She's a kind of sculptress. Makes these little characters like puppets. So incredibly beautiful. And so expressive with hand gestures and stuff. I was really impressed. And it started influencing my thinking about these robots in my movie, of how anthropomorphic we're going to let them be. And because these robots actually have a role similar to silent running in a way, because if this mission fails, if the movie mission fails and all the humans die, the robots are going to carry on.
Sure.
And that's when they get downloaded with the hidden firmware, and they rise to the occasion and become smarter than you think they are. It's just crazy. I'm revealing too much about my secret project.
I don't think it's crazy. I think it's probably going to happen soon.
I just love the relationship of man and machine.
Yep.
That's one of my.
And what about? All right, should we jump to Close Encounters?
Sure.
So Close Encounters. Let's talk about. You were working. Did you go to? They were in Alabama, right? For quite a bit.
Mobile, Alabama was supposed to be Muncie, Indiana.
Right, right. I heard it even rained inside. Is what I heard.
Lies.
It's a lie.
Yeah,
okay.
It's a dramatization.
So how did that come about? Steven Spielberg approached you. How did that all happen?
Well, yeah, he approached me because he'd heard about 2001. It wasn't long after 2000,
right.
And he certainly knew of silent running, and asked. I had been asked previously by George Lucas to do the effects for Star Wars. And I said, George, I'm really honored to be asked, but I'm directing now, and I don't want to do effects for anybody. But I'll help you. I actually helped put together his crew for ILM. I said, if you want the names of my drone guys, I'd be happy to do them for R2-D2 or whatever you want. But George just kind of went his own way and hired my own father and all my friends, which was because I wasn't busy.
Your father did some stuff with.
My father built all the camera systems for Star Wars.
That's unbelievable.
And anyhow, I'm just jumping around, but
so you get approached.
Close Encounters came a few months later after I was having obvious, serious trouble with Paramount Pictures that I was under contract to. Paramount didn't want to do what I was trying to do. And so I was kind of in a holding pattern. And then Steven showed up, and I said, yeah, let's do that. And, I was a really big admirer of Jaws.
Yep.
I thought, this guy is a really cool young director going someplace, and I'd love to work with him. And I can shove my ego for a while and do visual effects for him, and it'll help me get all my 65 millimeter camera equipment that I need for this other thing. So there's always kind of a strategic obsession that I'm trying to fulfill on the back of some movie, because you cannot tell the studio you're going to invent anything. They don't want to know. You have to hide it from them.
Okay.
And so this was a rationale to get a bunch of optical and camera equipment to do the show scan process, which I was developing at the same time. Anyhow, so I said yes to Steven, and we got along famously. And he was telling me what he wanted, and I said, well, that's really interesting, because the vision that Steven had for Close Encounters was quite different from what George had for Star Wars. Star Wars is a very hard sci-fi, metal ships in black skies, and that was that. And Close Encounters was all about these kind of diaphanous, mysterious, almost ghost-like apparitions that are going to appear in the sky. And I grew up on UFOs. My whole childhood was filled with UFOs. If you're my age, Life magazine, Look magazine, National Geographic, Popular Mechanics had UFOs on the cover almost every week. I said, whoa, what is going on? And so I grew up in a culture of UFOs. And I thought, well, this is really fascinating. I want to find out what's going on. So it's a long story. I'm probably not going to tell it now because it would take me another half an hour. But I was truly fascinated with what we could do with UFOs in this movie. And I'll tell you just the best part of the story, which is that Spielberg was collaborating with a guy named J. Allen Hynek, who was a UFO researcher and had already written some books. I didn't know at the time that he was actually liberally lifting ideas from Jacques Vallée, who was the French UFO researcher, depicted by Francois Truffaut as Lacombe.
Right.
There's a real French UFO guy, and he's still alive today, and he's a good friend of mine.
I didn't know that.
So it's a really interesting story. And so I didn't know at the time I was working on Close Encounters that what happens in that movie may have actually happened. You with me? It's a documentary on events that happened previously. I said, wow, that is mind-boggling, and I want to know more about that story. So I have a secret life trying to figure out what UFOs are all about.
Wow.
I'm not going to give up until I do.
What about the look with the mothership and all? Was that true that Steven Spielberg was looking at Long Beach and some of the industrial?
Yes. Yeah, he would say things because he was very expressive, and his initial idea was that the mothership would just be a big black thing in the sky that would block out the sky, that would block out the stars.
To be scary.
Be scary and ominous, and almost nothing to it except black. And he tried that before I even came on the film, and it was just didn't happen. That wasn't anything good to look at. And so the idea, what was in the mothership going to be? What was it going to be? What was it going to be? And he started talking about things. He says, well, if you were looking at these cracking towers down in San Pedro, California, which are these big towers with lights all over them and smoke coming out, he said, if you could imagine looking at that while you're standing on your head, that's what I'd like the mothership to look like, with all these glowing lights. And I said, well, what about the UFOs? And he said, well, if you go to the airport and you watch the landing lights of the planes coming in at night, you don't see the plane, you just see the lights. You can't tell what the shape of it is. and he liked that glaring kind of thing. And so that kind of lent the whole idea of the smoke room, shooting in smoke, creating lens flares, selecting lenses in order to get a certain kind of lens flare, and creating filters and stuff in front of the lens to get this diaphanous, mysterious kind of thing. And then my partner, Richard Jurisic, really inventing a whole new way of using an optical printer to composite shots like that, where the matte, which is the holdout matte between the foreground and the background, is not hard-edged. It had to be very soft and very diaphanous. So we would often use the original negative of the shot itself as its own matte. And I can't explain it any better than that, but it would retain these soft edges so that when one bright lit thing moved in front of another, it wouldn't just be a hard cutout.
Right.
It would be this mysterious, gossamer, glowing thing. And that's kind of what led to the mothership. And then we brought down Ralph McQuarrie, who was the designer for Star Wars,
right,
who was a friend of George as well, and said, well, what do you think about this mothership? And he did an illustration for this mothership. We can't find this illustration right now. We're looking for it. But he did an illustration which really kind of set the tone for what this would look like. And then we embellished it with all these lights and neon and glowing things and smoke rooms to create this
how big was the
magical
model?
thing. About 6 feet in diameter.
Okay, and then how big would the room be that you would light and smoke
Very
up?
small room, very small room. We had a little warehouse we were renting to shoot the mothership in. I'd say the room was only 20 feet square.
And then, was it on this film or another film where you're dealing with smoke and water as well? How did you do the clouds? Where they're breaking through
Well, the clouds was another idea that I had been playing with way back on 2001 because Kubrick was interested in liquids.
Yeah.
And he had hired a guy from New York who was doing these diaphanous kind of cosmic explosions by dropping paint onto black water and photographing it at 96 frames a second. And had actually shot some of that stuff before the making of 2001 and made a reel of this stuff, which he showed to MGM, which got him the money to make the movie.
Oh, wow.
That predated the production. And then we did a lot more on the movie. So Kubrick was very much into liquids and those kind of amazing, fluidic, dynamic things that is like nature at all scales.
With frame per
it could
second.
It could be as big as that, or it could look like the size of a galaxy.
Right.
And it was an amazing thing. And so we did a lot more of that. And then, I had one day I remember, putting some half and half into a cup of coffee, just sitting there kind of tripping out. And it didn't go anywhere because we were at the end of the production. We didn't have any way to use that for anything, but it stuck in my mind. And so when Close Encounters came up, I readdressed that idea. I said, because Stephen wanted the UFOs to come out of clouds. And I said, well, we don't happen to have clouds at our disposal anytime we want, so we could use this tank idea. And started experimenting, again, with just simple things like white paint in water, or white. It turned out to be somewhere between half and half and 2% milk was really good in water to make fake clouds.
Whole milk doesn't work.
Yeah. No, it's too thick. And then there was a young guy working for us named Scott Squires, who was a young intern kind of trainee, wannabe cameraman, visual effects guy, who was kind of scientific. And he said, clouds are inversion layers. That the reason clouds have flat bottoms is that they've hit some pressure layer in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And so they spread out. He said, well, why don't we fill the tank half full of salt water, which has a heavier specific density than fresh water, and fill the other half of the tank with fresh water, keep them separate. I said, wow, let's try that. And it was absolutely fabulous.
Wow.
And so that led to the design of the cloud tank, which was about a 6-foot square aquarium, really, about 3 foot deep of water, half and half salt water, half fresh water. And then I used an atomic manipulator arm that I had found during the making of Andromeda Strain, which was this tool they used. It's a prop. It's actually a real tool, but they use it in the movie where, like, a scientist is outside the hot room, moving. He's gripping a thing like this and moving it around. And there's this pantograph thing that goes up over through the wall and comes down into the hot room where the radiation is and can pick things up and move things around. And so you can manipulate radioactive materials and actually see through the glass. I thought, wow, I could paint with that.
Wow.
because I'm an artist. And so the idea was to paint three-dimensionally by being able to pull a trigger and inject half and half or milk or whatever into water. And so we shot a test to see if this would work. This was completely new. We built this whole thing, built the tank, rented this manipulator arm from Atomics International, and shot this test, and shot it in 70 millimeter film. And it starts out, the shot is just completely black. There's nothing there. And suddenly, right up high in the frame, a little white puff of cloud starts to appear. Then I started moving it around and started getting bigger until 2 minutes later, the entire frame is filled with this giant bank of clouds. And
Eureka.
it was definitely Eureka. We took this film to, I think we had a screening room, a screening facility built in the basement of a church in Wyoming, and showed it to the producers and a representative of the studio. This was very early, and this was the beginning of shooting was Wyoming. And I didn't find out until a couple of months ago that shot is what got Steven Spielberg the funding to make the movie.
Wow.
That convinced the studio that we were going to deliver.
And we say thank you. We say thank you for that.
Right. Well, they don't. But anyway, there's all these kind of stories that connect things together because David Beagleman was the head of the studio.
Yeah.
He got in trouble. He ended up being the head of MGM, but he hired me to do Brainstorm because he knew I'd saved his butt on Columbia Pictures for Close Encounters. That's how Brainstorm got funded. So it paid off.
He owed you one.
Yeah.
What about, okay, can we go, did Star Trek the Motion Picture came next, right?
No, Blade Runner came immediately after Close Encounters.
So Blade Runner was like 1980, 81?
I can't remember dates, but yeah, it's right after it.
I remember because I went to LA and I remember I kept going to see Blade Runner over and over again. I won't keep you too long.
It's okay.
But Blade Runner, I know that I saw an interview with Ridley Scott, and he said he was not going to make the movie unless he made it with you.
Really?
Yes.
That's nice to hear.
If you watch the if you watch the Blade Runner behind the scenes, and he said he would not have made that movie unless he had Doug Trumbull. That's what he says on there.
Wow. Thanks.
Can you talk about working with Ridley Scott, talking about Blade Runner, talking about these images, which frankly, I just think they're phenomenal, and I see what's happening today in the new one, and these images are just so powerful. Can you talk about that?
Well, I guess what I would say about it is that